I will tell you that in the last 5 days, and I said this on Weather Brains a couple of nights ago, I don't think I've ever experienced such a difficult forecast. This weather system we had in Texas, and we'll talk more about it in a few minutes, but it was an incredibly different type of situation. It was not the short range high resolution model guidance at times was horrible, and it didn't help us. And it got where sometimes in this event in the last week or so that I use radar to forecast, and radar is not a forecast tool. But it got where you sort of began to rely on that to some degree, and it was so difficult. And then we just had these tremendous amounts of rainfall that occurred. And in the last week, I'll tell you, I don't mind admitting I've gone through shock. Gone through anger. I've gone through sadness. I hope I'm getting closer to the part where I want answers on all of our behalves, the Weather Enterprise's behalf, about why we have actually ended up seeing this. Let me make one other statement real quick, and I'll be glad to get into more of this discussion with you. One thing that I will tell you right off the bat, and I want to make it very clear, and I've made it clear with everyone I've interviewed with this week, networks and talk shows and everywhere else, the people that hit the buttons on the AWIPs at the National Weather Service at Austin, San Antonio, those are all friends of mine. And I know every one of those people, those men and women, and I would trust them with my life. And I will tell you that there is no evidence in my mind at all that the National Weather Service, after being in some ways thrown underneath the bus originally on Friday, they did their job, and they did it in an office which is short staffed, but they did it with surge staffing. We had 5 people in our Weather Service office. And for people who say that the watches and warnings weren't out, you're simply incorrect. The watches and warnings were out. We know it. There are even circumstances people don't know about the warnings. They all went out with WIA on them, all of them, because the National Weather Service in Austin, San Antonio has a policy that they don't issue base flash flood warnings, and they haven't for 10 years. They only issue them with considerable and with catastrophic tags and with emergency tags. That's an office policy because we are in flash flood alley down here. So I'll tell you that the office is devastated by what they see around them. And I think also they have to be devastated by the fact that originally people said in some cases there were no watches and warnings. They were out there. And I think as a group, we have to, as a weather enterprise in this country, I think we really seriously have to look and demand answers, but maybe not tonight and maybe not the next couple of days, because I'm going to tell you our whole thing now down here is to try to reunite families, and knowing that this is not a recovery process. This is just, it's not we're not going to find anyone at this point that it's going to end up in a good story. This is all recovery at this point. So we're just trying to make families complete. And that is so difficult. And I will tell you before I throw it back to y'all that my Texar group, and I've talked to other people that have been down in Kerrville and also here in Austin, where we had 7 fatalities 15 miles that way. These people are seeing things that none of us should ever have to see in our lives. And so I want some answers along the way, but right now let's just get the recovery underway and get that done. And then we can all talk about it and have a discussion about what we can do better in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right, Troy. There's so much to unpack, and the emotions and the human side of this is of the utmost importance. And then we can go through, and I'm sure there'll be hearings and meetings and deliberations and finger pointing. We were talking about this a little before the show started. The death toll as we're streaming on this Wednesday night is over 100. The missing made a jump yesterday to over 150 people missing and counting. And I was once again having flashbacks to Helene here in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
Death toll kept going up. The amount of people who were missing kept going up. And the best case scenario that I think all of us here in the Carolinas who still have wounded hearts from what we saw, and now we're watching it play out with you all, I can only hope that at least the number of missing is wrong. And of course, I hope that the number of fatalities is wrong too, but that one seems a little bit more verified than the pure number of missing, because we know after Helene, the number of missing dramatically went down after they went back through the list and they recounted where people were. And so I guess I'm hoping and praying that is what happens for you all too.
And I've talked to so many people the last couple of days, guys, that are up in your neck of the woods that have told me what it was like there. And I know people in Asheville, and I know people, and I don't know. I think when y'all's event happened up there, I don't think these events don't hit home until they hit home sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the way it was. And we began to realize in the last, over the weekend how bad this was, because we had that event. And then here in Austin, we had the flash flood event Saturday night, 15 miles that way. And I sat here with rescue groups trying to tell them that cell was sitting there basically spinning and dropping excessive rainfall amounts and going nowhere. And that's what resulted in our 7 fatalities here in Travis County, including a fire chief of a volunteer fire department, which I know of pretty closely. So it's hard, but at the same time, you would hope that we learn some things.
A lot of heroes who, some of which unfortunately lost their own lives trying to save other lives. And we'll learn more about their names and hopefully their pictures and their loved ones as this continues to unfold. I wanted to just show on the screen again, because Troy, you mentioned it, and this is just the radar loop from the early morning of Friday, July 4th. And folks, if you're listening to our Carolina Weather Group audio podcast, we are looping 5 or 6 hours worth of radar here. This is not what you typically see when you just go to your radar app and you hit play and maybe you're looking at the past 20 minutes. That's almost what it looks like in terms of motion of these storms. But over the course of 5 hours, this is practically no motion. And Troy, as you mentioned, we can see all of those green polygons for the flash flood warnings that were issued. I also want to go, and I have some photos that the officials in Texas have put out. And Troy, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I'm going to just say that I'm naive about this, and I have not visited this lovely part of the country, which I do hope to at some point come to, but I understand it's called hill country, and I feel like in some of these pictures I can start to get a sense of how this river cuts through these hills, and you can see it here in some of these landscapes, how you kind of have peaks and valleys, if you will. Can you just, for folks like myself who've never been there, describe this terrain to us?
Well, that's what makes up. And of course, I'm a Texas Aggie, so hill country means there are plenty of hills. That, first of all, is part of the thing. But the other two things are not as apparent. And I'm sure that other people on the panel realize this. But what you don't know is that below this soil that you're seeing in most cases here, there is first of all very little soil. Below that are layers of limestone in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. And it's only an inch or two, if even that much, down. And so we call it flash flood alley because of the hills, because of the subsoil limestone layers. If rain hits that at rain rates of 4 to 7 inches an hour, which was in the original flash flood watch, there's nothing good about that anyway. And 4 to 7 was the low end from the original forecast. Sure. But then there's another issue too, which is huge, and it comes more into geography and growth, and that is the urbanization, particularly the eastern part of this flash flood alley, particularly along the I-35, Interstate 35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio. And I will tell you that, having been in Kerrville a few times, that even Kerrville's growing. There's not one day that Kerrville doesn't have a new parking lot or something else where we're replacing what little dirt, at least it can run off a little, it can soak in a little bit, with concrete and asphalt. And this urbanization factor, in combination with the subsoil limestone layers and the hilly nature of the Texas hill country. I'm going to throw another thing in here as well, and I'm hoping those people on the panel will understand this, but combine that with the fact that most people do not, and I'm talking about people in I think people in the Carolinas may understand it more because of last year, and the people in the hill country understand it more because of this week. They do not understand the power of moving water. They do not get it. We swim in water, we bathe in water, we shower in water, and people do not understand what happens when you start moving that water along at 10, 15, 20 miles an hour. And if it's a foot deep, it knocks us off our feet. And believe me, I got some weight. It would take it to do that. But I'm telling you, it will. A 20-foot wall of water. And then I go back to thinking about 6, 7, 8-year-old children.